Hello! Welcome to Common Censored. I'm Lee Camp, joined as always by Eleanor Goldfield.
Hello, hello.
And this is the show where we talk censored stories and people, sensible solutions, and common ground movements to fight and build.
And sometimes other stuff.
And we got a big show for you. We're going to talk about this coronavirus. Not sure if you heard about it. Jeremy Corbyn. Some news about him and about how he was taken down by the inside of his own party. Talk about some animals euthanized because it's a pretty incredible story, and much more. We'll get into all of it. But yes, So at first I thought I could ignore this because I tried to, when it's just fucking idiots, I just try to ignore it for a while, and then sometimes it gets to like a breaking point where it's just too dumb and there's too much of it, and we have to address it. Do you want to start us off about the COVIDiots, or?
No, I think you should.
Well, there's been some great memes going around about the people who have decided that they don't like pandemics. Meh. I am not a fan of pandemics, and so I'm going to get out there and prove people wrong. And so they're protesting the shutdown orders. And I want to talk a little about the numbers, because some people are like, oh, well, they're exaggerating it. It's no worse than the flu. In a bad flu season, you can lose over 50,000 people. Okay. The number of people that they're currently saying have died from coronavirus over the past couple of months is 40-some thousand. 40, I think it's one or two or whatever. It'll be 45,000 probably by the time you're listening to this. So let's say 45,000. So in the next week, it'll be up to just about the worst flu season we have, which isn't even every flu season. It's just occasionally. But the worst flu season we have. Okay, over a couple of months. Now what people don't seem to be considering is they're like, well, that's not as bad. That's just as bad as the flu. So what's the difference? The difference is it's killed that many with our economy mostly shut down, with people staying home, with people avoiding each other, with masks on, with gloves on. It's killed that many. If we'd done nothing, if we start doing nothing now, it's going to be in the millions just in America. It would just be insane amount of death just in America, and that's that's how it's different than the flu. That's what's different than the flu. And a lot of people don't seem to really acknowledge that. Then you have the true, oh my God, idiots like Dr. Phil, who was on Fox News and said, well, 5,000 people die every year, or whatever number he gave, which apparently was wrong anyway, so it doesn't really matter whether I get it right anyway. But he's like, 5,000 people die a year from swimming pools. We're not shutting down the economy. We're not putting people on lockdown. Yeah, you know the sentence you've never heard? My friend died from a swimming pool, and then two of his family members caught it. Mm-hmm. Or two of his other friends caught swimming pools from him, and then they also died. It's called not contagious, you fucking idiot.
It's really too bad that stupidity is also contagious, because clearly it is. And I just want to share, I saw this last night on an Instagram post, and I snarfed my wine.
Which is always very elegant.
Okay, let's just pause and point out that I'm wearing sweatpants and an oversized sweatshirt. So I am nothing if not elegant.
Everybody in America is right now responding, me too.
Exactly. Power to the sweatpants. Because let's be honest, I might not be able to fit into my regular pants at the end of this. But there was this hilarious post on Instagram where it said that the quarantine protesters are known as the Klux Klan.
And I don't know how viral that is. Maybe everybody had already heard that one, but I think it's awesome.
I don't think everyone's heard that because, it was a relatively new post. Yes, but that made my night. And you had one too, right? The COVIDiots?
Well, I saw that somewhere. I didn't make it up. Yeah, the COVID idiots. And then and maybe, I don't know whether people are saying this too, but, so Trump, in order to call for protests, look, I've said many times, Trump is a brilliant tactician in certain regards. In many ways, he's the dumbest human being to ever exist. But in many regards, in terms of distraction and everything else, he is kind of brilliant. And at first, he tried to fight coronavirus in the same way he fights every other thing he doesn't like, which is to deny it exists. So he was saying, it's nothing, it's not a big deal, whatever. And then he realized that you can't really... It'd be like if there was a fire that was burning up half of America, and he was like, it's not there. And then people were like, I can see it. He realized he couldn't lie about it anymore, at least not on that level. So he did start saying it's real and everything. But then he realized, well, you know what I'll do is I'll create a fight. Everyone's hating me right now for this lockdown. If I create a fight against the states, now it's not on me. Now all my followers have someone else to hate, someone else to get mad at. So he started basically creating flash mobs against the states, acting like it's their fault. And so he started tweeting out, liberate whatever, Minnesota, liberate Wisconsin, liberate Virginia, and liberate all these states. And so then you have a bunch of people running out there with signs that say things like "Give me liberty" or "Give me death." And I think it should be "Give me liberty" and "Give me death," because that's what you're doing if you all congregate together to have your "Give me liberty" signs. And look, this does not mean I support mass surveillance. Like, people have to understand nuance here. You can understand a pandemic. You can see that we need to be doing this. You can see we need to be shut down largely in order to mitigate the number of people that will die from this. But also be against mass surveillance. Like, you can have both those things. It's called nuance.
Well, I don't even think that's an issue. I think that's a non-issue. The real hypocrisy, and if anybody tries to bring that up, they're a fucking idiot. The real issue here and the real hypocrisy is the fact that these same people that are now protesting that they have to stay home and watch Netflix and eat donuts are the same people that say that the children in cages just should have followed the rules. Oh, well, if they came here legally. The people that end up in jail for their entire life for selling a fucking plant. Oh, well, they should have just followed the rules. Oh, yeah, asshole? Well, maybe you should fucking follow the rules for once and stay at the fuck at home. So that, and this is the point. I don't really give a shit if they die. I give a shit if nurses and doctors die because they have to take care of these dumbasses, which is the issue. Nurses and doctors are dying because they don't have access to appropriate PPE. And a lot of it is yes, like other frontline workers that are coming in that didn't have a choice, that had to go to work because our system is so fucked up. But some of it is people who are like, I don't think this is a real thing, and then they end up in the fucking ER, like coughing, coughing all over nurses and doctors who are then now their lives are at risk because these people are fucking idiots.
Boris Johnson ran around going, I'm going to shake hands with coronavirus people. I don't care. It's not a big deal. And then, of course, he ended up in the fucking ICU, barely hanging on. So, and the other thing is people keep saying the numbers are okay. Well, I heard some guy on the radio say, well, okay, it might be a real thing, but the numbers are over-accounted. They're exaggerating these to scare us. But in fact, the numbers are likely in America heavily underaccounted because everybody who's there's tons of people dying at home, sick at home, who don't go to hospitals either because they're just a stoic type that doesn't go to a hospital, which is plenty of that in America. But there's also many people afraid of the bills, afraid of there's immigrants who are afraid they're going to be ICE is going to be notified. There's so many people across America that are terrified of hospitals, terrified of the cost it would give them to show up to a hospital, the cost involved. And so many people are dying at home. And I heard an interview with an FDNY woman, a firefighter in New York, and she was talking about how so half the fire department had it, and that was mainly the interview. But she happened to mention within the interview that they've seen a crazy spike. I think this was Bronx or Queens or something. crazy spike in the number of people dying at home from cardiac arrest. And the firefighters and EMTs show up and they say, died of cardiac arrest. And that's the end of it. There's no test on the dead, usually, for coronavirus. And so she's like, yeah, cardiac arrest in apartments in New York City has gone up at least fivefold. 5 times as many people dying of cardiac arrest or having cardiac arrest. And many of these are coronavirus related, but we're not going to test the dead when they die in an apartment. And so really these numbers are heavily undercounted. And one other point I want to make about the undercount is when China revealed this. So China increased the number that had died in Wuhan by something like 1,500. So it was over 3,000, and then they moved it to 5,000 or something. And when they did that, all of our mainstream media was running around because they're doing this anti-China propaganda, which they continue with. All our media was running around going, well, look at that, they're propaganda. They under pressure, they revealed that more people had died in Wuhan because they were pressured to reveal the truth. And it's like, no, you fucking assholes. They're doing the same thing we're doing, which is noticing that people had died at home, and then they were willing to come forward and reveal it. That and those numbers are low compared to what we're dealing with because we fucking act like it's not happening, or a lot of us do, and a lot of our politicians do. Anyway.
Right, and I just want to circle back to the protest thing because people are conflating having to stay home and watch Netflix with a human rights issue. And it's not, okay? It's just not. And I think and I've seen some chatter in the Twitter sphere and whatnot about where are all the leftists that they care so much about human rights? Yeah, we do, but this is not a fucking human rights issue, okay? You having to sit at home and deal with your spouse who you never liked anyway, that's not a human rights issue, okay? The human rights issue is that, as Lee mentioned, undocumented folks not being able to access proper care and dying because of it. The real human rights issue is that people don't have access to food, and at the same time, food is being destroyed across the nation. People are dumping tons and tons of milk. People are crushing eggs. People are plowing over fresh produce because there aren't restaurants and schools to buy that. Meanwhile, people are literally starving inside their homes. That is a human rights issue. And I talk about that a little bit in a new article about mutual aid that I just released with Roar that I'll be posting as well. But these are the human rights issues, okay? And the problem with the right wing, or really just kind of like the center of our government and the sort of capitalist mindset, is that it's all about me, right? It's all about the individual. I can't travel. I can't go to my second home, which was one of the complaints in a recent lawsuit against the Michigan government, that some folks were stuck in their second home and they couldn't get back to their first home where they had their better shoes or whatever the fuck.
Their bath bombs are in the first home, all right?
So
do you understand what we're dealing with here?
This is the paradigm that's the problem. This is why the left is not arguing that this is a human rights issue, because the real human rights issue is this entire paradigm that says me, 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 me. It's all about me, and why can't I have my things and my freedom to wander around and by proxy kill a bunch of fucking people. That is the core issue.
And there are actually protests going on for real human rights issues in this country that are getting no coverage. So even as our mainstream media, and there's a slight difference between Fox News and CNN and MSNBC. Fox News is trying to add fire to the protests, to the COVIDiots running around, and CNN and MSNBC are trying to mock those protests. So there is a difference there, but meanwhile, CNN and MSNBC and NPR and CBS and all those are not covering the protest? Why are they covering those protests, but they're not covering the protests against the mass incarceration we have in this country where coronavirus is running rampant because you have overcrowded jails, people sleeping on top of each other, people, of course, not getting any actual medical care when they do get sick. So coronavirus is running wild in the prisons, and there are protests against that, for example, and there's protests to get medical personnel PPE. And much of that is not being covered. You know, these prison protests are not being covered, yet they'll cover the fucking guy out in front of the State House saying it's my right to leave my house to go fuck a cow.
Right, and that's a good point, because a lot of the protests that have been happening around prisons, and also not just your typical prisons, but the concentration camps for migrants have been happening in caravans, like in cars, so that people are remaining safe while protesting, which, this is a brilliant shift and adaptation of our tactics. But you're right, those don't get coverage. It's this sort of Jerry Springer style, right-wing Klux Klan bullshit that gets coverage. I'm reminded of in 2016 when corporate media felt that it was more important to show the empty podium with Trump's name on it than show Bernie Sanders, because one of those things just feeds into that Jerry Springer paradigm, and the other actually talks about what's wrong with that Jerry Springer paradigm. The same thing here. One of these protests, the caravan protests, talks about real human rights issues and the real deep problems and the deep rot of our system. And one of those is just fluff. Dangerous fluff, but it's fucking fluff. Just like Donald Trump is dangerous fluff.
Well, and I think it's kind of this vicious cycle where, on many things I talk about how, CNN is, for example, or MSNBC is no different from Fox News. But in this scenario with these protests, I think what it is Trump creates a fervor. It then builds a little. Fox News then adds fuel to it. And then CNN and MSNBC and all the others, they don't want to look like they're not covering the thing that Fox News says is a big issue. So they then run around covering it. And granted, they give their own angle on it. But it all feeds off itself. So these protests get 1,000 times more coverage than the let's decrease excessive incarceration in this country. Those protests are basically not covered at all. Or the talk about how many immigrants are imprisoned right now at the borders and how the coronavirus is running wild there as well. And those type of protests also get no coverage.
Yep.
Do you want to? I wanted to about your Roar article. Do you want to update people on how mutual aid is going for you? And people can get the Roar article. You'll probably put it on your website, right?
Well, I usually let the platforms themselves hold the article for a bit before I put it on my site, for the sake of getting traffic to them. So if you just go to roarmag.org, you'll find it there. But in terms of mutual aid continues to fill the gaping holes that are left by this system, as I've mentioned before. Here in DC, I'm super stoked to announce that we've partnered. I talked about some of the food waste, and here in DC, the farmers markets have shut down. Some of the farmers markets have shut down because the restrictions have gotten too stringent for a lot of the smaller producers to be able to comply with. So we've partnered with a coalition of Black farmers to bring in fresh produce and get that to folks in our neighborhood, which is awesome and huge, particularly because a lot of the items that folks need are fresh food, fresh produce, and a lot of the most marginalized folks live in food deserts and don't have access to fresh food, and also suffer from pre-existing conditions like diabetes and heart condition, where you really need
and capitalism.
Right. Where you really need, healthy foods, as opposed to, the cheaper foods like a bag of Doritos that is not, that has less than no nutritional value. So, we're partnering with them, which is also, of course, uplifting Black farmers that have been hit hard by this downturn in food.
Doritos are like a placebo food. They make you think you've eaten. But
Do
you
they?
haven't eaten anything.
Do they? Because I mean, it's been a long time since I had Doritos, but I feel like they just make you want to eat more. So it's like not even a placebo food. But yeah, so we're doing that. We're also continuing to work with the unhoused community and the undocumented community, getting them access to things like grocery gift cards and financial assistance. We will have a Patreon page up soon, if y'all can spare a few bucks for that as well. And yeah, things are chugging along all over the country. It's really awesome to see, and I think I've talked about this before, but I think like right now we're seeing the true breadth of humanity. You're seeing the worst and you're seeing the best, and I think that mutual aid is an example of the best. It's the example of voluntary and reciprocal aid in smaller groups and communities that are looking out for each other. And of course, you're seeing the worst. You're seeing the worst sides of capitalism triggered in these moments. But I think that because you have that spectrum, you can see what's possible. You can see what's possible outside the confines of capitalism, and that's really what we have to hold on to right now and look forwards to as we continue to go through this, because this won't last forever, and neither will capitalism. The question is, how will capitalism end, and how will we end it? Will we be a sort of a passive onlooker as capitalism eats itself, or will we be the ones to kill it?
Great points. Couple of quick things before we continue. You can help fund this show, which has no ads, no commercials, no nothing, at patreon.com/commoncensored. You can get special content there as well for signing up. Patreon.com/commoncensored. Just a couple of bucks makes a difference. And I want a couple of thank yous to Jay, Peter, Jarrett, Janice. A lot of J's in there. Thank you, Jay people, for signing up. Yeah, it's you. That's a few of the new ones. I'm not going to go through all of them, but you really do.
Thank you.
Yeah, you really do make a difference. And my stand-up comedy special is free right now. I figured you all stuck at home. You want something to watch. Well, how about an hour of live stand-up comedy taped back when audiences were allowed to get together in Los Angeles, and that's at leecampamerican.com. Because it's called Not Allowed on American TV. That's leecampamerican.com. If you watch it, please share it with friends. Tell people to check it out. I really appreciate that. You can watch the trailer to Eleanor's upcoming movie at hardroadofhope.com.
And that is coming out soon.
Soon, yeah. Keep an eye out. Watch this space, as the cool kids say. My book is 10% off at leecampbook.com. Just use the coupon code, the initials of the title, BPAPL. That's leecampbook.com. And yeah, email us. You can email us topics and everything. Commoncensored at protonmail.com. Questions, topics, and Eleanor's website, as always, is artkillingapathy.com. So let's continue on. I wanted to chat a little more about something that I just did a moment of clarity on, and we'll get a little deeper into it, but also for those of you who missed the moment of clarity. Basically, there's been some leaked text, or a ton of leaked WhatsApp messages from inside the Labour Party. Now, the Labour Party, as most of you know, is a party in the UK that has a lot of similarities to our Democrats here in the US. They're slightly less corporate, maybe, but there are two sides of the Labour Party. There's the Tony Blair side that is basically like, George Bush. He helped go into Iraq, killing 1 million people, just a total piece of garbage. And then there's the Jeremy Corbyn side of the Labour Party that actually seems to care about workers, care about those who are oppressed. He speaks out in favor of Palestinian rights and things like that are not common for politicians in the U.S. or in the U.K. And so Jeremy Corbyn is a rare politician in that regard. And these messages reveal that in the 2017 snap election, where Theresa May had an election and thought she was going to do well in it, and Jeremy Corbyn ended up surprising everyone and doing much better. He did not take Parliament, but that wasn't expected. The Labour Party got a bunch more seats and was very close to taking over Parliament. And it was a huge shocker. During that campaign, a large number of senior officials within the Labour Party hated Jeremy Corbyn. That's what these texts reveal, and hated anyone who supported him. They called them Trotskyites or Trots. They talked in the messages about doing nothing in the office as to hurt his campaign. They wanted him to lose. So this is the higher-ups of his own party wanting him to lose, because their hope was that if he lost badly, if Labour lost badly, they could replace Jeremy Corbyn with another Blairite, with another pro-corporate sack of shit. And it ended up not working. He had so much support that they actually did well, but it ended up working in the next time around, right? This last election, they were able to undermine Jeremy Corbyn, and the Labour Party did very poorly. Jeremy Corbyn did poorly. So this is very similar to what happened to Bernie Sanders and has just happened in 2020, but we have the proof from 2016 when the DNC emails were leaked to WikiLeaks, and we learned that the DNC party, the Democratic Party, which Bernie Sanders, despite caucusing despite being an independent caucus as a Democrat, was running as a Democrat, his own party technically was running against him, was trying to undermine him, was trying to sink him, and they succeeded by rigging the primary. And we now know that. And now we know the same about Jeremy Corbyn, but it's slightly more complicated because whereas Bernie Sanders is an outsider, claiming to be a Democrat for the election, Jeremy Corbyn is an insider of the Labour Party. He's been a Labour Party member for, I think, his whole life or whatever. But, there were senior officials that, mocking in these texts. They're mocking other senior officials that support him. They're joking around about how they don't do anything in the office, but they make it look like they're working by tapping away at the keyboard. I mean, this is how the corporate state makes sure that there is not actually any revolutionary change. There is not actually any progress.
Yeah, and it's disappointing but not surprising to see this. As you mentioned, it's slightly different, but it's not surprising but disappointing to see a similar thing play out in the UK as in the US with Bernie Sanders. And it's a shame Boris Johnson recovered. I'll just say that.
So I guess the question I'll pose to you is: Do you think that any change can come from inside the Labour Party or inside the Democrats?
I'll quote Michelle Alexander, who wrote The New Jim Crow. She said it would be easier to form a new party than try to reform the Democrats. And she said that in 2015 or something. And it's true. It's kind of like if you have a body that's totally septic, are you going to try and get that body back to good? Or are you going to just be like, you know what, we're going to have to let this one go. And we're going to try and build something better. And that's exactly, the entire Democratic establishment is rotten. It's rotten to the very core. And there's no way to reform that. You can't reform, you can't appeal to your oppressors to stop oppressing. And that's a bastardization of an Assata Shakur quote. But there's no point in putting your energies there. And I've had people message me and say, oh, let's work on appealing to Biden. No, don't work on appealing to Biden. It's a total waste of time. You can't beg a drug addict to stop being a drug addict unless they want to stop being a drug addict. And the Democrats are incredibly addicted to war, to environmental destruction, to the oppression of the most marginalized communities, just like the Republicans. They are deeply addicted to that. And there is not only no recognition of that addiction, there is no willingness to stem or mitigate that addiction, certainly not end it. So appealing to them is a total fucking waste of time. And I know that sucks because it feels like we're in between a rock and a hard place right now. But guess what? We've been in between this rock and a hard place for a very long time. That's how we got Trump. This whole like, oh, well, this year we really have to vote for the lesser of... No. This kind of mentality and this goldfish-like memory of not recognizing that this is why we're in this place of watching the rise of fascism again in this country. It's absurd. And so again, like I've mentioned on the show before, appealing to your oppressors and trying to vote away evil by voting for evil is fucking stupid. And I'm sorry I can't be nice about it because this is not the time to be nice. This is the time to be real, and we don't have time. People will say, we don't have time for Trump. And it's like, well, we don't have time for Biden. Obama boasted about laying enough pipeline in the U.S. to wrap around the world twice. Obama opened up offshore drilling. Obama was known as the deporter-in-chief. He threw kids in cages, too. He bombed the shit out of nations around the world. So, I mean, the idea that we can vote for a lesser of two evils and still come out on top and make the progress necessary to have a livable future is fucking stupid. And I think we have to be really real about that and recognize that change does not come in the ballot box, and that change has only ever and will only ever come from us engaging in a very, very active and loud way to rattle thrones and topple this disgusting structure.
It reminds me of like two cars that are going full speed, 80 miles an hour, headed towards a cliff. And one of the two cars is on the left and is at a slightly greater angle. So it'll go off the cliff like
a little later,
like 2 seconds after the car on the right. And America is half in the car on the right and half in the car on the left, and saying, listen, the answer is to be in the car on the left.
Yeah.
For everybody, please just support the car on the left. We don't have time for the car on the right. And you're like,
yeah.
They're both going off the cliff.
And I get like people listening to this might think, well, that's not true. We just need to stem the progress of this horrible policy that Trump's put into place. Well, he didn't put it into place. He took over the horrible policy. And second of all, this sort of concept that we can only do as good as Obama did. What was so great and different before Trump was elected was the Black, brown, and indigenous communities. Were they doing really well? Were they living life high on the hog? Was our climate doing great? The performative eloquence and performative progressivism of Obama shielded us from a lot of the same realities that we see with Trump. And I think that, it's important that we dig into those realities. And if you look at what's, I think like last week you pointed out the difference between Merrick Garland, Obama's Supreme Court pick, and Kavanaugh is what, like 9%? They voted the same when they were on the bench together 91% of the time. We have to look at this because this is reality. Reality is not what you hear in a lovely speech. Obama's super eloquent, but so is Trudeau. So is Macron. Like, these people know how to spin these beautiful lies. And it's on us. It's our fault if we eat that up. And we have to look at the actual policy that's made and who's affected by it and how they're affected, not what they say in the Rose Garden.
And a lot of the worst shit that Trump has done has been with the support of the Democrats. Mm-hmm. All of our wars overseas, all of our economic wars that have killed tens of thousands in Venezuela or Iran or Syria, all of our, mass destruction by our military industrial complex, all supported by the Democrats. And people go, well, yeah, but Trump, has fostered the alt-right, which created the Charlottesville catastrophe. It's like, okay, yes, I agree, that's not good. Charlottesville, one person died. From our military-industrial complex, tens of thousands die, if not millions, every year. So, the part that the Democrats support is about 1,000 times larger than the part they are against.
Well, and let's be honest.
Same with the bailout, with this mass bailout of corporations that we've just seen, trillions of dollars given to corporations, while average Americans are going to get almost nothing. That is supported by the Democrats. That is with their help. They line up with Trump, and yet they are outraged by a tweet. So they're going to stand up against a tweet. They're not going to stand up against the actual policies.
Yeah, well, and let's be honest, Charlottesville would, the idea that the Democrats could have or would have stopped Charlottesville. I mean, how? The Democrats do not support any sort of policy that lifts up these marginalized communities that are targeted and attacked by fascism. They do not stand up against the spread of fascism. Biden himself has called one of the signal racists of our time, Strom Thurmond, a good friend. I mean, the idea...
He gave the eulogy at his death.
The idea that the Democrats are significantly less racist or significantly less against or are more against fascism is not true, and it is provably not true. So again, so important to look at the realities of these situations and not just look at the fact that, well, but Biden has a black friend. Okay, that's great. Serial killers have friends who are alive. This is not proof of anything. So it's really important to look at the realities of the policies and see where they overlap, which is basically everywhere.
So let's jump to another interesting and important story in a lot of ways. Obviously, Julian Assange is still locked up in the harshest prison in Britain, Belmarsh prison, for the crime of publishing true stories about the crimes of our American empire and the British Empire. That is what he's locked up for. Absolutely nothing else he's done wrong. All other investigations have been dropped. So it really is the crime of revealing the criminality of America and Britain and some other countries. Of course, we're the one that's indicting them, so really it's the crime of revealing America and our incredibly corrupt, incredibly criminal enterprise. It turns out that Assange has had 2 children while in the Ecuadorian embassy with lawyer Stella Morris, who's on his was on his law team or attorneys team. And, they kept it secret until now. She's not a public person or didn't want to be, but ultimately has been forced, has had her hand forced because I think the prosecution in Britain was going to reveal it anyway. So she has now come forward and spoken about it, and it just makes Julian Assange's situation all the more horrifying and pressing that he has 2 little kids that never get to see their father. And it really is a interesting development, but I think that people should be horrified. He's been there for a year in Belmarsh, and they're trying to get him out because he is especially vulnerable to COVID-19. He obviously has underlying issues, all kinds of health issues. And, of course, coronavirus is running wild in the UK prisons just as it is in the US. So if Julian Assange gets it, who knows whether it could take his life. Of course, the British, corrupt criminal justice system is not going to let him out. But, yeah, interesting update there that he has 2 very young kids.
Yeah.
And let's get to chickens. I've always wanted to say that. It's time to get to chickens.
So this story is pretty horrific, actually. And it's a story that I saw this morning. And it speaks to what I had mentioned. Sorry, by the way, if you can hear the garbage truck in the background.
Oh, sorry, that was me. I'm kind of hungry.
So this speaks to the issue that I mentioned before, which is that food is being destroyed in vast quantities because restaurants, schools, and caterers are no longer open, and at the same time, of course, people are literally starving. So the constructions of capitalism do not address need. They literally don't feed need. They feed bottom lines of the of the ruling class, and this is more evidence of that. So a Minnesota contract egg farmer said that 61,000 of his chickens were euthanized. And I mean, that number is so astronomical. I can't even like imagine what that looks like, or it's just massive. But that also speaks to this type of the big ag farming that we have, that a farm would have 61,000 chickens to fucking euthanize in the first place. It really speaks to the non-sustainable nature of our food system, and that we're not relying on smaller scale farms that practice things like regenerative farming. But there was one point of this that I really wanted to highlight, which was that a food service worker told the Star Tribune when asked about this story, it's painless for the birds, so I don't have a thing against that. But when they euthanized the birds, that was our paycheck that was euthanized. And I like that right there is really the cornerstone of capitalism, right? I don't give a shit about these literally like 60,000 animals that were just killed for no fucking reason, because guess what? I know a lot of people that would gladly take some eggs right now, but that were fucking killed for no reason. All I care about is the money. And here's the thing. It's like, I do still understand where this person is coming from, because now they might be, ironically, in the position where they're starving and desperate because they don't have money. But it's the problem that our system puts you in that mindset where literally all of the empathy for any other living beings is beaten out of you because all you can fucking care about is money. That is so fucking sick and twisted.
Right, and this is an insane number. Tens of thousands of living creatures executed just because our economic system cannot deal with change, can't deal with need, can't deal with sustainability. The whole idea of the field of economics, which is only about 100 years old, or got going about 120 years ago, no one had ever heard of it before. Economics was designed to figure out the most efficient ways for society to function. And now it's doing the complete opposite under capitalism. It's only finding out the most profitable ways for this system to function. And of course, you have a lot of things going on in the factory farming world. One is obviously the putting of profit above all else, above the health of the workers and the health of the health of the animals, and not just the health of, but it's absolute torture farming. I mean, even if you're someone who eats meat, that does not mean you need to be okay with a living creature being absolutely tortured its entire existence. Right. There is a difference. Hopefully you can walk and chew gum at the same time. You can understand these 2 points at the same time. And these factory farms have taken over farming in America. They're incredibly powerful, incredibly monstrous, and they force smaller farms to basically do their bidding, such that the smaller farms now make less and less of the profit. They want those contracts with, let's say, Smithfield, which I'm going to get to more about Smithfield in a moment, but they want those contracts with the monopolized big farms, and so therefore those companies have this power to tell them, well, you have to do this, this, and this. You have to raise your chickens in this way. You have to get tens of thousands of chickens within this small space and produce this many eggs. And if you don't, we're not going to give you the contract. Right. And we're going to give you this tiny percentage of what you make for doing that. So really, a lot of these farmers are then under the knife where they can barely make ends meet because they've been exploited by the factory farms. So it's just horrific on so many levels. But another probably mass execution or something that went on, was because hundreds, you might have heard this story, this actually was in the mainstream media, hundreds were infected at a Smithfield plant in South Dakota, and now we're finding out other of large factory farms have hundreds of employees infected with coronavirus. And, this speaks to multiple things. One is that this has to do with management not giving a fuck about the workers. This has to do with the workers who are incredibly exploited. This is one of the worst jobs you can have. They're all on top of each other. They're working 12-hour shifts. They're, obviously doing horrific stuff, cutting apart animals and things like that. Many have like PTSD. I read an article about that, dealing with the amount of killing that has to go on at these places. But so I think they said that this plant processes, quote unquote, meaning executes and deals with about over 19,000 pork products. Well, so 19,000 pigs, basically, hogs, 19,000 a day. And it had to shut down. So now you have 19,000 a day hogs that are not being executed. And I remember a quote from one of the farmers saying, there's a lot of local farmers around the Smithfield plant that deliver their hogs to the Smithfield plant. And one of them said, well, what are we going to do with these 19,000 hogs? And I was thinking, is letting them live not an option? Like, is that not even considered, the idea that these pigs could keep walking around?
Well, and here's the thing. I'm sure that a lot of that thinking has to do with the fact that they don't want to pay for the upkeep, right? They don't want to have to pay for feeding these animals, whereas of course if you had smaller production, then you wouldn't have to worry about feeding 50,000 pigs. But this also reminds me of a story that I saw in Bloomberg, which was the fact that with all these planes grounded, they need a place to park them, and that parked planes actually need a lot of TLC. Because you have to,
they don't degrade.
Right, you have to maintain the hydraulics. You have to make sure that it's not too humid, or else things will rust.
You gotta sing sweetly into its ear.
You gotta keep birds from nesting in them. So there's a lot of work that goes into the plain upkeep of planes. Which Bloomberg was also making the point that this is why airlines really need the bailout, because people think that they're just losing money on the canceled flights. No, they're also losing money on the upkeep of these planes, and
they have it pretty rough,
right? And it just speaks to this sort of massive scale. And I'm not comparing planes to pigs, but I'm saying that it reminded me.
I wish that were the expression instead of apples and oranges. It's planes and pigs here. That makes a lot more sense.
It does.
Because apples and oranges are kind of similar.
I know, you can make a nice fruit salad.
What are you talking about? That's planes and pigs.
But it's this concept of scale, right? That we have to have things on this mass-produced scale, and then we have to keep it up, right? Well, we just have to keep killing these pigs. We just have to keep all of these planes in operation. It's this mentality that the scale must be maintained. When in reality, we should have fewer flights in the sky, because it's not environmentally sustainable to have all these fucking flights. We can't have all of these animals butchered because that's not sustainable. It's also totally inhumane.
Can I add that this is a cycle? So if you think about how capitalism works, and I often talk about the gravity of capitalism, if you think about how the system progresses. Okay, so let's go back, to 1980 or 1970 or something, when there were fewer flights and fewer chickens processed. Both of these speak to kind of the same thing. And so you have these companies getting bigger and bigger, right? And they then buy out smaller ones, so they become more and more of a monopoly. So now you're getting bigger and bigger factory farms. Well, what else does the company do when it's trying to keep, quote unquote, growing? Well, it's going to advertise to the average American to say, hey, you want to buy more of our product, whatever that product is. Let's say it's pork. You want to buy more pork than you thought you needed. So let us tell you how you need pork all the the time. Let us do ad after ad after ad about bacon on this, bacon on that, bacon on your chocolate bars, bacon wrapped around your apples,
seriously.
bacon on fucking everything. Let's do you know what? Your bars of soap should smell like bacon. Bacon, they literally sell bacon scented condoms. And so it's just like bacon, like let's push through advertising to the American people that they need meat more than they think they need meat.
Mm-hmm.
And then let's see how low we can get the cost so that people are capable of buying more meat.
Right.
So then the people go to the store and they think, oh, I want to be that great American family. They don't consciously think I saw the commercials, but they saw the commercials.
Mm-hmm.
So their mind is thinking, you know what? I want a happy, healthy kid. I'm going to get them a big pork sandwich for every day for lunch. So they go and look, it's affordable. Oh, 2 for 1 at the grocery store. And so they get their fucking packs of bologna or whatever mystery meat, and they bring it home and they're feeding their family more and more meat. That company then gets bigger. It then kills more pigs, slaughters more hogs, however you want to phrase it, and it then buys out even more smaller farms, and then it advertises more, and then it starts selling to fast food places, and advertising. The advertising for those is going on, and so it really is this process where it's all centered around growth, which is profit. And that growth, like a cancer, must keep growing, and it gets immense. Mm-hmm. And all of this is a massive cycle. It is the gravity of capitalism, and it is a gravity towards environmental destruction, towards the slaughtering of tens of thousands, really millions across the country, of sentient beings that must be executed every day so that we can support this addiction that has been created in people for an endless amount of meat. It really is this cycle. It's a vicious cycle. And one other aspect about this is, like I kind of mentioned before, incredibly inefficient. Mm-hmm. I think the Zeitgeist movement does perhaps the best of really explaining how terribly inefficient all of this is. But even before coronavirus, we were throwing out something like 40% of all our food. Americans are taught to fill their plates, not necessarily eat it all, throw out what you don't need, throw out what you didn't put on the plate, and it's just a massive amount of waste. So our system is incredibly inefficient. If all of the food we made and processed was going to feed people, mm-hmm. you could easily feed everyone. Like way overboard feed everyone.
Right.
But instead, it's about throwing it out.
Yeah, and instead you have this massive waste of food that's ongoing while people are spending hours and hours in line at food banks and desperately calling mutual aid networks looking for food, while you have people needlessly killing animals and needlessly plowing over fresh produce. It's absurd. And I also, like, another point to what you were talking about, Lee, is the false cheapness. I'm sure there's an actual economic term for that.
False scarcity.
Because the idea that it's cheaper to buy like 4 pounds of pork than it is to buy, like, say, organic carrots,
right.
Which is fucking ridiculous, because the amount of resources that it takes to raise a pig, when the water drought was going on in California, well, I guess it's still ongoing, but when it was at its worst, right before I moved back in 2015, the people were rightfully so pointing out that it takes, I can't remember how many, but like several gallons gallons of water just to take care of a cow for a day, and multiply that by however many hundreds of thousands of cows are in California alone.
I do remember one hamburger is showering for 2 months. So the amount of water.
Yeah. I mean, think of that, and then compare that to a pound of organic carrots or something. So it's the idea that it's cheaper, but the money for taking care of those cows is coming from somewhere, right? And we're just. We're subsidizing the market so that these items are less by the time they get to the consumer. But in reality, the cost, not just economic, but the environmental cost of keeping up these practices is immense.
And I'm glad you mentioned carrots. We're talking about how wasteful, because does everybody know what baby carrots are? They're fucking big carrots that they chopped up and shredded to look like baby carrots, and all of that shredding goes in the garbage can. So you take a giant carrot, you chop it in 3 baby carrots, you throw out like 30% of it, and those are your baby carrots. Because people thought baby carrots were fucking adorable. But you can't call them fucking baby carrots, all right? The big carrots that have been chopped up. It'd be like if I had a friend and I took his arm. I wouldn't call that arm a baby, would I? It's not a fucking baby.
Well, I guess it depends on your mental state. Yeah, no, and there's I think there are a couple of organizations now that work with quote unquote ugly vegetables or ugly produce because so much of it is thrown away because people don't want a pepper that looks funny. Why
would you?
I know.
I mean, who could handle an ugly pepper?
I know.
No, that's so true. We're so vain we have to have pretty vegetables.
Which, by the way, who decides what the fucking pretty vegetable is? You assholes.
You haven't seen hotornotveg.com?
No, I missed that.
All right, shall we wrap it up?
Yes, indeed.
Thank you guys so much for joining us. We're going to do 10 more minutes over at patreon.com/commoncensored. Please join us over there and become a member if you have $1 or $2. Patreon.com/commoncensored. My comedy special, if you want to watch it right now for free online, you can just click play. It's at leecampamerican.com. And check out all of Eleanor's stuff at artkillingapathy.com. Thank you guys so much. Keep fighting.
Act out.